Have you ever noticed that no matter how many conversations you have with your wife trying to fix your struggling marriage, you somehow end up right back where you started? Different day, different words, same frustration. Nothing ever changes. Today, I'm going to show you why you keep having the same marriage conversation over and over again, and why the answer probably isn't another conversation. When you're in a very frustrating time in your relationship where it almost feels like piecework just to get through the day with as limited conflict as possible, each conversation feels like it is about the current immediate problem. Your wife may share something with you that you've argued about recently. Maybe she complains about not spending enough time with you, that you work too much, and you're not doing things together. You react and talk about how last month you took her to this place or that place. So then you argue about it. Then maybe things cool down a bit and you have a conversation trying to resolve that argument again. And this sort of goes on repeat for a long time, but things just feel off every time it happens. You might walk away each time believing that if you could just logically fix this specific issue, get her to understand your point of view, everything's going to get better. But the big mistake is not knowing that what you are talking about today in that argument is usually not what you're actually talking about. Trying to convince her that you do spend time with her and you took her to that restaurant or Airbnb for the weekend a month ago is actually irrelevant to today's argument. If you walk into your basement and notice a crack running down the concrete, you can stand there and stare at that crack all day long. You can take pictures of it on your phone, you can measure it, you can send it to your friends and see what they think. But the crack isn't the problem. The crack is just evidence of the real problem. Something underneath the foundation shifted first and the crack shows up as a result. And this is the big problem with us men when we're dealing with struggling relationships, because it's the same situation. We are logical in nature, and if a problem comes up that day, we're going to go about it analytically to try and solve that immediate problem and just square it away. But relationships don't work like problems at work or projects around the house. They're built on emotional experiences over time. When your relationship is struggling, a conversation about communication is often not really about communication at all. It's usually the symptom of something developing underneath the surface for a long time. When I was younger, I thought relationships worked like math. If I could just show my work clearly enough, the answer would become obvious and I would get all the marks. Unfortunately, they don't work that way. You don't get to present your findings and suddenly everyone, more specifically your spouse, agrees. What matters isn't whether your explanation makes logical sense, even if it's the most logical explanation in history. The only thing that matters is the experience she's been having with you emotionally over a period of time. That's why these conversations become so frustrating, because you keep trying to solve this visible problem. Meanwhile, she's responding to 6 months or a year of patterns that created it. You're both responding to two completely different realities. And when those two things don't line up, the conversation feels like it goes nowhere. Which brings me to the next thing that most men never consider. This one might sting a little bit, but I think it's incredibly important. A lot of men keep entering conversations when the relationship is struggling, believing that they haven't communicated clearly enough. So they try again, and again, and again. We think that she's just not understanding us correctly, but to be honest, most of the time she already knows exactly what you're going to say before you say it. She knows you're going to tell her you love her and that you're trying. She knows that you're sorry for all the other mistakes, and she knows you're going to tell her you really want things to work. She's heard all of it before. And I was so oblivious to this. I remember when me and my ex-fiance would get into these exact type of conversations when things were getting shaky in our relationship. It felt like she was misinterpreting almost everything I said. So I would take the same bait every time and just get upset and try and prove my point or tell her, like, this is what I'm trying to say. You're not listening to me. And of course, she would get upset and I would just keep trying to push it so she understood. And it would be the same thing over and over again. I would come back and apologize and then basically get into the same conversation again where I'm trying to explain myself and convince her why things will be okay with us, thinking it's just going to all click back into place when she finally sees it. Like I said, she already understands your words. The issue is that it just keeps on happening on repeat, so the words stop carrying any weight. Imagine somebody, like maybe it's somebody in your friend group who is always late to important events, and they apologize every time. And maybe the first few times, the apology kind of means something. But after like the 20th time, the apology is going to be predictable and pretty much meaningless. Your wife has heard the same script so many times when the issue is the emotional patterns underneath everything, so she starts to disconnect from all of those words. So you feel like you're not being understood and you're trying harder and harder to kind of improve what you're saying, improve that script. But what she is paying attention to is your emotional consistency, how you react. And if you're making her feel emotional safety instead of getting upset at her, repeating the same old spiel over and over again, like I would constantly do with my ex-fiance, Being able to communicate and have good conversations and being able to listen to her and validate her perspective is incredibly important to a healthy marriage, even if you don't agree with what she's saying. But communication is only going to work best when it's supporting change. And a lot of men accidentally try to use communication as a substitute for change. They keep explaining what they intended to do instead of actually becoming that guy who was already on the way to making those changes. Which leads us into one of the biggest reasons these conversations become so exhausting. One thing I wish somebody would have taught me years ago, because it could have saved me over a decade of heartbreak, is that most people spend their entire lives fighting symptoms. They're so focused on reacting to symptoms instead of actually fighting the causes. And that was me for so long in relationships. I would just be kind of coasting along. And when things would start to get rocky, I would put all my attention to doing all the wrong things to stem those symptoms I would be seeing from her, whether that's becoming cold or distant, seeming less attractive, whatever I started to sense. Same thing for you right now in your relationship. You are having all these conversations trying to fix everything because you notice your wife is seeming distant and she isn't being as affectionate or straight up told you she's unhappy. It becomes where you are wondering why she is acting this way towards you, so you're focusing on all of those things. But all of those things are outcomes. They're not the true origins. It's like a check engine light coming on in your car and you're staring at that light wondering if it's just going to kind of go off by itself, or you get annoyed at the light coming on and you're wondering like, how do I turn this freaking light off? And it's like, dude, the light is telling you something underneath needs attention. Forget about the actual life itself. This is exactly where many marriage conversations get stuck and feel like the same cycle of frustration. The entire discussion revolves around the warning light and not the actual engine. The husband wants more affection because he isn't getting any from her lately. The wife wants more space. The husband wants reassurance. The wife wants less pressure. And around it goes. When the divorce papers show up, nobody knows. I'm not saying that lightly, but you have to see that discussing the symptoms while the underlying dynamic remains untouched is exactly why you're there 6 months later feeling like you're in the same conversation over and over again. That's why I always tell my coaching clients that as part of being the leader, you need to become more aware of the patterns in your relationship. That way, when you notice her start being a little colder or less affectionate, you're able to catch it and understand what it means and why it's happening. Maybe you haven't been making her feel emotionally safe or heard lately, so she's kind of pulling back a bit. This stuff is easily correctable when you start to catch it at the source, instead of not understanding it and spending all the time, like most guys, trying to figure out exactly what to say to her or text her to make it feel better or fix things or, accuse her of punishing you for treating that way. Instead of all that nonsense, you're going to understand what is actually creating that outcome and dynamic, and that is far more powerful to maintaining a healthy and happy marriage. It will allow you to stop trying to get her into all kinds of conversations to try and fix things in your marriage when the end result is always frustratingly the same. And this is one of the biggest lies movies have told us about relationships. They've sold us on absolute snake oil. There's this notion that there's always some magical conversation waiting around the corner, where there's like the big breakthrough, the emotional moment where two people sit down, say all the right things, cry a little bit, hug it out, and suddenly everything changes. Let me ask you, have you been so upset with the thought of losing her that you poured out all of the things you thought were the right things to say and then cried to her? I have, in my decade of disaster. Want to take a guess how all of those conversations went over? Real life doesn't work that way. In fact, if you're in a marriage crisis right now, you've probably had already like dozens of these conversations. And if you're watching this video, I'm going to guess that they didn't create the breakthrough you were hoping for. That's because the movies and TV shows send us down a wild goose chase for a conversation that simply doesn't exist. The conversation we all think about is going to happen when we prepare to talk to her, where we say what we think is the right thing to say, and suddenly she says, you're right, I see everything differently now. It doesn't exist. Relationships are not lost in one conversation, and they're not rebuilt in one conversation either. And something I notice as an early pattern all the time when I work with men going through separation and marriage crisis, most men feel like their life is basically on hold and they're going to wait and see what she decides. Basically, they are waiting for her to come around or change her mind without thinking there's anything they can do to speed up the process for her. The focus is so much on how she is acting towards them, which are the symptoms I talked about, that the underlying problem is not even considered for a while, if at all. I know many of you wish you had some secret sentence you could say to instantly reconnect with her, and I don't blame you because I thought they existed as well. But they don't. And this is why it's so imperative that you start taking action immediately if you are in that marriage crisis and feeling stuck, like your life is on hold while you wait to see what she figures out what she wants to do. You can't leave yourself at the mercy of what she is doing or not doing. You have to start leading yourself. If you've been having the same conversation or conversations about your marriage over and over, I want you to consider this. It's probably not that you're saying the wrong things necessarily, but it's that you're asking conversations to do a job they're never designed to do. Conversations can create understanding, they can create clarity, and definitely create connection, but only if they're done right. Conversations cannot replace the transformation that is needed to really get yourself to a place where you're easily creating that connection and attraction with her. And when a marriage has been shaped by months or years of negative emotional experiences, the path forward isn't going to be one perfect talk. So the next step for you is to go watch my free Relationship Rebuild Masterclass by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment below. I have walked in your shoes so many times to a point where I couldn't ignore that changes had to be made. Once I figured out finally what actually works, it changed my life forever. So go check out the masterclass where I'm going to walk you through what turned my relationship life around, and that I teach men who are navigating separation, emotional distance, or even divorce being on the table. At the end of the masterclass, you will have an opportunity to apply to work with me directly so that you're no longer guessing and you can finally understand exactly what your situation requires. And if this video resonated with you, you will also want to watch this next one called How to Save Your Marriage When You're the Only One Trying.